This chapter contains the first sex scene of my inner life. I have cut it from this video to prevent someone from getting sexually gratified by it. It was not a very well-written sex scene, but you never know when sexual gratification will strike, and sometimes you cannot mean to sexually gratify someone and it can happen anyway. So it has been cut, as will all other sex scenes going forward. However, if you are a completionist and you want to be sexually gratified by bad writing, there is a link in the description.
I will never forget the day I met Link. It was a warm spring day. I was on my usual trip back to Hyrule with my wagon of goods to sell in Hyrule Market at the annual Spring Festival. 1. I have been a traveling merchant since I was 14. This is my 6th year returning to Hyrule. The last 2 years I was not able to return when Princess Zelda sent word of an evil presence in Hyrule. Then, all contact was lost. For almost 2 years I tried to contact Princess Zelda. Desperately, I kept trying to find out if she was ok. I was never too long without contact with my good friend. Then I was considering going to investigate, when one day word came in that peace had been restored to Hyrule, due to the legendary Hero of Time. After some catching up time with my old friend, I came to find out what really happened. Seems that a Gerudo named Ganondorf, an evil man from Gerudo Valley, desired the legendary Triforce. Though the Triforce was only told in fairy tales to the children where I come from, I was amazed to find out it really existed. She told me how she played with things she knew nothing about, and about how Ganondorf tricked the soon-to-be Hero of Time into unlocking the door to the Sacred Realm. I even noticed that Zelda was a little older than I. Last I saw her, she was 4 years younger than me. It was told to me that when Ganondorf went into the Temple of Time and into the Scared Realm, time jumped ahead in Hyrule 7 years. Yet only 2 years passed in my land and in the rest of the world. After the Hero of Time defeated the King of Evil, the hero was granted to either return to the past or to remain in the present time. Since he chose to remain in the present, Zelda jumped ahead of me in age by 4 years. It seemed that everyone in Hyrule jumped in age from the rest of the world. But now that peace was restored, life resumed in Hyrule. As I made my way down the desert trail that led to Hyrule, I began to think about whom the legendary Hero of Time was. I was very interested in meeting this man. Princess Zelda never told me his name, but I was going to make it a point this time to finally meet Hyrule's hero. As I turned off the dirt trail and onto Hyrule Field, Hyrule Castle appeared in the distance. Dust and dirt kicked up behind the wheels of my wagon as it creaked along. Then I came closer to the gates of Hyrule Castle. A familiar face appeared to greet me. I pulled back on the reins to make the horses come to a complete stop at the front gate, and I realized that the person greeting me was my good friend, Princess Zelda. I've been a good friend of the royal family ever since my first arrival in Hyrule 6 years ago for Hyrule's annual Spring Festival. Ever since the first day I met the princess, I have been one of her closest friends. I was even considered part of the royal family. Yeah, okay. After I climbed down from my perch on the wagon, I ran over to Zelda and hugged her. "Hello, Princess Zelda, my good friend. Yes, it is good to see you. How have you been?" Looking at her, I could tell she was happy to see me.
"Oh, it is so good to see you again, my friend. Come, come, father is waiting to see you."
Leaving my wagon to be tended to by stable hands, I followed Zelda through the marketplace and to the gates that led to the castle. As we approached the castle gates, I saw some of the same guards I have seen in the past few years. Saluting to Princess Zelda and me was a guard named Perino. I met him a few years back during one of my first visits to Hyrule. He was one of the guards that befriended me the first time I arrived. He smiled a friendly smile as we passed by. "It's nice to see you again, Mistress Jaina," he said as we waved. As I smiled back, I thought to myself how good it was to be back again. We went through the front gate and made our way towards the palace gardens. Upon approaching the gates leading to the garden, another familiar face appeared to greet me. As we walked closer, I realized that the face was of Zelda's caretaker, Impa of the Shikas. As I walked over to Impa, she turned to fully face me, and a small smile crossed my face.
It's good to see you again, my friend. How has life been treating you?
Impa asked, and put a hand on my shoulder. Oh, fine. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had to chase some thieves off on the first night that I was on my way here. Though after some facing time off, I was able to chase them away with my bow. Then I made a big grin as I remembered the looks on the thieves' faces when I rained arrows on them.
Well, it seems that with the abilities you possess, you should have no problem keeping your possessions safe.
With another smile, Impa gestured for us to go into the garden. That is where I met him, the man that took my heart. As we walked into the garden, I saw a young man in green, with his back facing us, polishing a rather odd sword. As I watched him, I had begun to notice something about the sword. It had a rather odd shape on the hilt. The hilt was blue, with the top of the hilt looking like a fish's tail. The sword looked rather strangely familiar. I leaned over to Princess Zelda and asked her who the young man was.
That is the legendary hero of time. His name is Link.
Zelda replied. My eyes grew as big as saucers as I turned to look back at him. You mean he is the hero of time you told me about? The one who saved Hyrule? Then that must be the legendary Master Sword he is holding. Zelda nodded yes. Just then, Link turned to look at us, and with one look at his face, my heart sank into my chest. He was the most gorgeous man I had ever laid my eyes upon. At that very moment, I fell in love. His eyes were like looking down into deep blue pools of water. His lips firm, his ears long and sexy, beautiful blonde hair that parted in the middle, and his body was so tight and muscular that it took my breath away. When our eyes met, I blushed and swiftly looked away. He approached me and took my hand in his, gently kissed it, and asked,
Who might this beautiful lady be?
I turned my head back to face him, and as our eyes met again, I blushed. My name is Jenna. I'm a traveling merchant from the great Libyan coast. My village is there. I have been a friend of the royal family for a long time. And I come every year for Hyrule's annual spring festival. He looked into my eyes and smiled. Watching him smile made my heart pound in my chest. He again took my hand in his, kissed it again, and spoke.
Nice to meet you, Mistress Jenna. You are as beautiful as a winter rose,
he said as he stared at me with his enchanted blue eyes. Thank you, I stammered as I blushed again.
What are you doing tonight?
He asked with a soft smile. Stunned, not believing my ears, I turned and looked directly into his eyes again. Nothing really. I was just going to retire to my wagon and cook supper before settling in front of a fire to read a book.
I wonder what's for dinner.
With a glint in his eyes, he asked,
Why don't you join me tonight in Kokiri Village for the annual Spring Night celebration?
2.
It is a celebration feast that happens the night before the Spring Festival.
Without hesitation, I took him up on his offer. I would love to go, I said with a soft smile.
I will pick you up this evening,
Link said with a grin. Just then, a deep voice rumbled through the garden. Jenna, my dear friend, how have ye been? A grand fatherly face appeared before me. With a smile I curtsied before the king. King Zelda, my old friend, how I have missed you. I have been just fine. It is really nice to see you again, I said with excitement in my voice. As always, the king thought of me as a daughter, and always looked forward to the day when I would arrive in Hyrule for the annual spring festival. He always liked to see what new merchandise I have picked up thought my travels since the last time I was there. And most of the time he would buy something from me. But he always liked it when I would show up, since I would bring lots of fun and happiness. As I looked at the king, I realized I was somewhat at home. As he started to approach me, I ran up to the king and gave him a hug. How I missed him! Ever since my parents died when I was young, I never let anyone get very close to me. But the king was different. He opened up to me, took me into his family, and became like a father to me. He gave me a home to come to every year. When I was in Hyrule, I felt at home.
Jenna, my sweet daughter, what have ye acquired through thy travels this past year?
I smiled at the king. You must see some of the new cloth I picked up in the city of Skyile, the great city of light. I smiled as the king's eyes grew big.
Jenna, my daughter, you must show me what you've acquired.
Then he took my hand and began to lead me out of the garden. With one last look back at Link, I smiled at him. We'll see you tonight, I said before I left. After spending some time with the king, he brought some of my new cloth, then let me settle in for the night. I returned to the inside of my wagon and prepared a hot bath. I went to the mirror and brushed my hair while I waited for the water to heat up. After about 5 minuets, the water was ready. As I slipped down into the warm water, it felt good against my sore muscles. I began to relax and slowly let my thoughts drift. Link was the only thing on my mind. He is so handsome. I thought to myself, that is the heroic man who became the legendary hero of time and saved Hyrule from a life of darkness. There was something tugged at the back of my mind. I remembered that I had wanted to marry one day. And Link would be a good choice since he was my age, strong, smart, and handsome, and would help make strong, beautiful children.
I will perfect my own race of people.
Yes, indeed, Link would make a good husband. Then I took the soap and washed up. After I washed, I got out of the tub and dried off. I went to the wardrobe closet to pick out a dress for this evening's occasion. After some rummaging, I picked out a low-cut white dress with lace that held the together. Gold-embroidered Triforce symbols lined the bottom of my dress, and the sleeves started from mid-arm and ran all the way down my arm to the wrist. Next, I picked a gold choker with the Triforce symbol for around my neck, and a gold Triforce ring for my finger. Then I had to do my hair. I braided my hair into a halo braid and ran a beautiful silver lace through it. After that, I went to the full-length mirror to look at myself. As I looked myself over, a knock came at the door. "Come!" I yelled. Appearing in the doorway was the man I had set my eyes on. His eyes grew big as he looked me over. "You look beautiful tonight," Link said as he took my hand and kissed it. Then he led me out the door. There were 2 horses in front, saddled for riding. One was a rust-colored mare with a white mane and tail with a black muzzle. The other was one of my brown mares with a black mane and tail. The one he had gotten was the one with the white star on her forehead, the one whom I named Star Dancer. He led me to my mare and helped me into the saddle. Then he mounted the other horse. Looking back at me, his eyes seemed to glow in the moonlight. "Follow me! I will lead the way!" Then he booted the horse in the legs and took off at a slow gallop. I then followed. We rode to the south side of Hyrule Field and came upon a long, dark tunnel. "This way!" Link called. "Through here!" I watched as Link disappeared into the tunnel. Then I followed. At the other end, we crossed a bridge and then into what seemed to be a village. Little people wearing green clothes that looked like kids started to surround us when we stopped. "This is the Kokiri village!" The place where I was raised, Link said as he dismounted. After I dismounted, one of the kid-like kokiri took our horses to tend to them. As I walked around the village, the childlike people began watching me. They all seemed very curious to who I was. As I looked around at them, I noticed that they had something floating around them. As I took a closer look, I noticed that they looked like fairies from the fairy tales told to us in our village as kids. Were these really fairies from the stories I had as a child? I thought to myself. Just then, one of the kokiri, a young girl, approached me. My name is Saria. What's yours? The young girl asked. My name is Jenna. It's a pleasure to meet you, I replied. Are you the one that came with my friend Link for our spring night festival? Saria's eyes seemed to glow at that moment. Yes, he invited me, I said. As a smile crossed the kokiri girl's face, I could tell that she knew I had my eyes set on Link, though she remained silent about it. There were male kokiri as well. One in particular was one named Mido. He was the leader of the kokiri and a dear friend of Saria and Link. He had a sense of humor, but he yet remained stern and headstrong, for he was their leader and was responsible for their lives. It was time for the feast. Dinner. Saria gestured for me to join them at the feast table. She led me to the seat next to Link. As I sat down next to him, she smiled and winked at me. Did she plan this? I asked myself, and then smiled. After a moment, I looked over all of the food. There was a great abundance of food to eat. There was cooked pork and a rich chestnut cream sauce, beef stew, cooked turkey, all different kinds of cheeses, bread and butter, cooked vegetables, and even many different kinds of fruit. My mouth began to water as I combed over the food. After I served myself, I began to eat. As I was eating, I could not help but notice that Link was watching me out of the corner of his eye. I could feel his stare, though it was pleasant. Then our eyes met, and a smile crossed his face. As I stared into his eyes, they seemed to glow under the light of the moon. He even looked more handsome in the moonlight, and I told myself that I would be crazy to pass up a man like this. After everyone finished eating, all of the kokiri got up and started to dance. Some of the kokiri even played instruments. As the music drifted in the air, Link took my hand in his. Would you care to dance? I looked at him and smiled. Yes, I'd love to. He led me to where everyone else was, and we started to dance. We danced and drank long into the night, and to show my appreciation, I even did a solo dance. Then, after I did my dance, I went to sit down and rest. I was tired. Link came and sat down beside me. You look real tired. Are you ready to retire? Link said, as he put his hand on my shoulder. I nodded yes and tried to get up and walk. But I was so tired and had too much to drink that I stumbled. Catching me in his arms, Link led me back to where I was sitting. I think it would be wise if you stay here tonight. I have plenty of room, and I can escort you back to the castle in the morning. Link looked at me with a worried look, and I decided to stay. And that is how we spent every night together, even up to the night when I finally shared his bed. I started to know within inside myself that Link was the one I wanted to be with, even more so on the night when I shared myself with him. It was a warm spring night, and night had just arrived. Link and I were sharing the quiet sounds of the night together. I had been seeing Link for a little more than a month. The spring festival had come and gone, and the warm weather was finally returning. All signs of winter were almost gone, and my time in Hyrule was about to end for this year. In 2 weeks I will be leaving for the city of Tarvera. Knowing this made me sad to go, since I did not want to leave Link. I had finally found someone that I truly loved, and I would have to leave him behind when it was time to leave. Even Link was not happy after I told him that I would be leaving soon. When I told him, his face went from happy to a depressed one. He wanted to be with me, and he wanted me to stay in Hyrule with him. But I was going to spend every last minute I had left with him enjoying it. We had remained quiet for quite some time. Then it was Link who broke the silence.
Jenna! It has been a wonderful almost 2 months with you.
I watched him as he stuttered to find his words.
Even as short as it was, I really enjoyed the time I've spent with you.
Link said, as a look of sadness appeared in his eyes. At that moment, I was on the verge of tears. I was in love with him. I leaned over and softly placed my lips on his and kissed him tenderly. Then he looked deep into my eyes and told me he loved me. With those words, I began to cry. I had never felt this way before, like the way he makes me feel when I'm with him. He gently took his hand and wiped away my tears. Then he put his hand underneath my chin and slowly lifted my head up until our eyes met. With his hand, he drew my face close to his, gently placed his lips on mine, and kissed me softly. At that moment, I took the opportunity to deepen the kiss. As our tongues met, I started to feel his hands caressing my body. As he gently caressed my body, I let out small moans into his mouth. Then he moved his lips to my neck, placing sweet nibbles on it as his hands trickled up my back to the clasp of my dress. Little by little, he slowly started to remove my dress, and I felt my body quivering under the gentle caressing of his broad hands as he pulled the dress down off my legs and tossed it aside. Slowly, he moved back to my lips and kissed me forcefully. His tongue began probing my mouth. My tongue slowly met his, causing it to intertwine with his, tasting the sweetness of him. Then we broke off the kiss, and I looked into his dark blue eyes as I reached up to remove the belt from around his waist. The next few days were depressing. Us knowing that I was leaving in less than 2 weeks made us depressed. The nights were spent mostly quiet except for the occasional sigh. I was beginning to think I'd never be this happy again. Link made me feel special. He made me feel like a woman. And he was my first. Do I really have to leave? I asked myself. But then I remembered that the places I traveled to every year were counting on me, so I had to go, love or not. It was the day before I was leaving. I was at the marketplace for the last time for this year. I was at my stand selling what I had left when I saw Link enter the market and headed for where I was. As I watched him, I wondered if this was going to be the last time I was ever going to see him. I began to cry when he approached me. Taking his hand, he gently wiped away my tears and told me not to cry. He looked deeply into my brown eyes and told me he had something to tell me. Then he got down on one knee and produced a small gold box. He opened it to reveal a gold diamond ring inside. With a loud gasp, I clapped my hands over my mouth. Then he took my hand in his.
Will you marry me?
He asked with hope in his eyes, as I started to cry again. Oh, my goddesses! Yes, I will, I said, in between tears. He took my left hand and placed the ring on my finger. Then he got up, we embraced, and started to kiss. Now I knew I did not have to leave. Hyrule was meant to be my home. We were destined to be together. Summer finally arrived, and signs of spring were slowly fading. I was spending my days at Hyrule Castle, helping with the chores and making plans for my upcoming wedding. Link spent his days building a home in the Lost Woods for us to live in after we were married. I was excited about our upcoming wedding. I was marrying Link. I finally had the man I fell in love with. He was special to me, and he was building a home for us to live in. A home for us to raise our family in. Link told me he wanted to be a father, and most of all, he wanted a son.
I'm Henry the Eighth, I am. Henry the Eighth, I am.
We had talked about having children together. When I first started my traveling, I did not want children, but now that I was marring Link, I decided I wanted to have children with him. Having children by him would make them strong and beautiful, since Link was strong and beautiful himself.
A race of atomic supermen which will conquer the world.
Even my friendship with Princess Zelda and her father grew stronger when we told them about our engagement and that we were going to have children. Since Zelda was not betrothed and had not yet wed, this was the closest thing to her being a mother and the king being a grandfather. Now that we were to wed, my life was almost accomplished.
And with our central couple already engaged, I have no idea where the story's going to go from here, but don't worry, it doesn't. Big thanks to all of our Patreon supporters, particularly Michael Fattori and Break System BSE, and if you want to see your own name up here, just check out the Patreon. It's as little as $1 a month. Also, please check out my Instagram and Twitter. I'm funny there.
With a glint in his eyes, he asked,
Why don't you join me tonight in Kokiri Village for the annual Spring Night